There is a specific kind of silence that settles over your life when you have worked very hard to build it far away from the people who hurt you. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of something finally, carefully chosen. The kind you earn one decision at a time, a new city, a new name, a new morning routine that belongs entirely to you. A dog who sleeps at your feet. A husband who does not require you to shrink. A studio full of work that came from your hands alone. That was my life on the morning everything changed. I am Sophia Bennett. 32 years old. A graphic designer based in Denver, Colorado. I have a small studio, a steady list of clients, a rescue dog named Max with one torn ear and the cautious heart of something that was also left behind too soon. I have a husband named Alex, who is patient in that rare, unperformative way, the kind of patient that actually holds. I have adoptive parents named Mark and Laura, who have been my real family for longer than my biological parents ever were, and I speak to them every Sunday without fail. I had built something real. Something quiet. Something mine. Then I woke up one Tuesday morning, picked up my phone, and saw 29 missed calls from an Illinois number. I stood in my kitchen holding that phone while my coffee went cold in my other hand. I did not press play on the voicemail right away. I did not need to. Because the body keeps its own records, and mine had already recognized something before my mind could name it. That familiar tightening across my chest. The way the room seemed to pull slightly sideways. The old, trained awareness of danger arriving through a door I had locked from the inside. Some memories do not fade with time. They wait. They sit in the dark corners of the life you build until one unremarkable morning they rise, and they drag you all the way back. For me, it took nothing more than a number on a screen. And suddenly, without moving an inch in my Denver kitchen, I was 12 years old again. Standing alone in the center of Chicago's Union Station, watching the only two people in the world who were supposed to protect me slow their car outside the front windows, look directly at me, and drive away laughing. To understand what happened at Union Station, you need to understand what kind of house I grew up in. And to understand that, you need to let go of whatever picture the word family brings up for you. Because the Caldwells of Willow Creek, Illinois looked nothing like what they were. From the outside, we were the story people pointed to. My parents owned a small chain of home goods stores. The cheerful kind with bright window displays and seasonal sales. Kitchen mixers, bedding sets, coffee makers. The kind of store where people wandered in for one thing and left with four. My father grilled on weekends. My mother waved at neighbors across the back fence. We attended church. We showed up at school events. We looked, by every visible measure, like the modest, hard-working, respectable American family that everyone else was supposed to be trying to become. But a house is not a home just because it has a tidy front porch. Inside, love was always conditional and safety always temporary. My mother had a particular gift for turning ordinary childhood moments into what she called lessons. That was her favorite word. Lessons. It made cruelty sound constructive. It made humiliation sound like education. It gave her permission to hurt me and call it parenting in the same breath. If I cried, I was too sensitive. If I asked for help, I was helpless. If I forgot something, I needed to learn responsibility. If I succeeded at something, she found the percentage I had missed and held it up like evidence. My father's contribution was simpler. He laughed. He cheered her on the way a spectator cheers at a game. He made bets. He thought all of it was funny in the particular way that men sometimes find funny the suffering of people they are supposed to protect. I learned very early how to read the atmosphere of a room before I walked into it. I learned how to make myself useful. I learned how to disappear. I learned that if I stayed quiet enough, small enough, invisible enough, I could sometimes move through an entire day without being chosen for one of their experiments. The experiments came in different sizes. When I was 8, I asked for a pair of sneakers at the mall because my old ones had split open at the toes. My mother told me I was being spoiled. She marched me to a bench near the food court, sat me down, and told me that if I wanted to live in the real world, I could start by sitting there alone and learning that nobody owed me anything. Then she and my father walked away. I sat on that bench for nearly 3 hours. I stared at the pretzel stand across the hall, smelling cinnamon and butter, trying with everything I had not to cry, because I had already learned that crying entertained them. When they finally came back, my father was grinning. He asked my mother if he owed her $20, because he had bet I would have moved from the spot. When I was 10, I cried in the parking lot after a youth sports event because a group of boys from school had mocked me in front of everyone. Instead of comfort, my parents drove to the far end of the lot after dark, told me to get out of the car, and left me there on a concrete curb while they drove away. I sat with my arms wrapped around my knees, watching headlights disappear one by one, until they came back nearly an hour later, with fast food they had bought for themselves, no apology, and my father's delighted announcement that he had won another bet. He had guessed I would still be there, that I would be too scared to walk away. That was the pattern. Everything was a test. Everything was a bet. Everything was an opportunity to prove that the world was brutal and cold, as though I needed them to make it more so. The cruelest part, the part one understand now in a way I could not at 10 years old, was that they never considered themselves cruel. They had language for it. They talked about grit, resilience, character, the real world. They used serious, grown-up words to dress ugly things in reasonable clothes. If you had asked them, they would have told you they were raising a strong, independent daughter. But independence was not what they were building. They were building fear. They were building hypervigilance. They were building a girl who was so skilled at surviving danger that she could not recognize safety when it finally arrived. The only place I ever felt like I existed outside their control was on paper. I drew constantly. On the backs of grocery receipts, in the margins of homework pages, on cheap sketchpads I bought with babysitting money I hoarded like a secret. I drew bedrooms with locked doors. I drew train windows full of moving light. I drew women standing on mountaintops with no one behind them, no one ahead of them, just open sky in every direction. I did not understand what I was drawing at 12. I understand it completely now. I was trying to draw my way out of my own life. What finally pushed everything over the edge was something so small most parents would not remember it a week later. I got a B+ in art class. Not mathematics. Not science. Art. The one class that made me feel like I existed. The one subject that had never felt like surviving, only like living. I was proud of it. That pride lasted exactly as long as it took to walk through the front door and see my mother holding the report card at the kitchen counter like it was a court summons. She asked how a girl who spent so much time drawing could still manage to disappoint her in the one class she supposedly cared about. My father said maybe I was getting lazy. My mother said maybe I had started believing effort was the same thing as excellence. That night, from my bedroom, I could hear them talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low and close in the way that always made my stomach pull tight. I heard my mother say I needed a lesson I would never forget. I heard my father say he would put money on that. I already knew something was coming. I just did not know how large it would be. The next morning, they were cheerful in that particular way that should have been my warning. My mother made pancakes. My father asked if I wanted orange juice with actual warmth in his voice. They said we were taking a day trip to Chicago, just the three of us, just for fun. For one desperate, stupid second, I thought maybe they had cooled down. Maybe the report card fight was over. Maybe this was the closest our family could manage to something like a reset. I should have known better. I had lived with them for 12 years. The drive from Willow Creek to Chicago felt wrong in the way that things feel wrong when your body understands something your mind is still trying to explain away. My father kept the radio loud and drummed on the steering wheel. My mother kept turning around from the passenger seat to ask me leading questions with that particular calm that always preceded something bad. Did I think I was smart? Did I think smart girls were ready for the real world? Did I think life would care whether I was frightened? Every answer I gave seemed to amuse them. Every silence I tried to take seemed to invite more questions. By the time the Chicago skyline appeared through the windshield, I had that feeling in my body, the one that lives somewhere between your chest and your stomach and tells you that whatever is coming, you will not be allowed to prepare for it. We parked near Union Station around noon. I had never seen anything that large or that crowded from the inside. The station felt like a city compressed under one extraordinary ceiling. People with rolling suitcases moved in every direction. Businessmen, families, tourists, college students, all of them with somewhere to be and every confidence about how to get there. I stayed close to my parents because I did not know where else to stand. Inside the main hall, my mother pointed to a large column near the entrance and told me to wait there while they moved the car and grabbed lunch. 15 minutes, she said. Maybe 20. I asked if I could come with them. My father laughed so loudly that people around us turned to look. He said I was 12, not 2. My mother leaned close to my ear and told me not to embarrass her in public. So I nodded. And I stayed. And I watched them walk away through the crowd until I could not see them anymore. I checked the large station clock every few minutes. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Then 45. I told myself the parking was difficult. The food line was long. They had gotten turned around somewhere. I told myself all the reasonable things a child tells herself when the alternative explanation is too large to hold. An hour in, the pain in my chest started. An hour and a half in, my hands were shaking so badly I had to press them against my legs to hide it. I had $9 in my pocket. No phone. No address written down. No idea how the train system worked or how far we were from home. I had never felt smaller in my life. I had never felt more alone. And I had lived with 2 people who made sure I knew exactly what alone felt like. I started walking a few steps away from the pillar, then rushing back. The instructions had been so clear. Wait right there. Even now, even with panic clawing up through my throat, I was still terrified of doing the wrong thing. Of giving them a reason to be disappointed in me, on top of everything else. The station grew louder as the afternoon went on. Every announcement over the speakers made my heart jump. Every dark-haired woman in the distance made me turn my head too fast. And then I saw the car. Through the glass of the station's front windows, I saw our car moving slowly along the street outside. My whole body jolted with a relief so overwhelming I almost laughed. I ran toward the glass doors, waving both arms, certain, absolutely certain, that they had come back for me. My father was driving. My mother was in the passenger seat. They were both looking directly at me. My father smiled first. Not the relieved smile of a parent who had found a lost child. The smile of a man watching a joke land exactly the way he hoped. My mother rolled down her window and leaned out just far enough for her voice to carry over the traffic noise between us. I bet $50, she called out, with a laugh already breaking through the words, that you can't even find your way home. My father lifted one hand off the steering wheel in a small, satisfied thumbs up. Then the car moved forward and disappeared into the current of Chicago traffic. I stood at those windows and felt the world change shape around me. It is one thing to fear that the people who are supposed to love you might forget you. It is something else entirely to watch them choose to leave. To see them look right at you. To understand, in a single, irreversible moment, that your fear is not a side effect of what they are doing. Your fear is the point. I do not know how long I stood at those windows. At some point, the sounds of the station pulled me back into my body. A stranger brushed past me and muttered "excuse me," and something about the ordinary courtesy of it, the sheer, unremarkable normalness of a stranger acknowledging my presence, snapped me back to the floor beneath my feet. I went back inside. I did not know what else to do. For the next few hours, I wandered. Crying on and off, wiping my face every few minutes because I had been trained to be ashamed of it. Sitting on benches and standing up again. Walking from one end of the station to the other, trying to think in complete sentences, finding I could not. I stayed away from the exits because stepping into the city felt like stepping into something with no edges. I stayed away from police because my parents had spent years telling me that if I ever caused trouble, authority figures would only make things worse. I stayed away from strangers because the same people who had just abandoned me in a transit hub had also spent my entire childhood teaching me that asking for help was weakness, and weakness invited cruelty. Looking back, that was one of the most precise and devastating parts of what they did. They had trained me, systematically, not to trust the very people who could have helped me, then placed me in a situation where trust was the only thing standing between me and real danger. The woman who finally noticed me was a station employee named Maria. She was in her 50s, with tired eyes and a calm voice that had the quality of something that has seen a great deal and chosen patience anyway. She had apparently watched me pass the same row of seats and vending machines multiple times. She stepped into my path near a hallway leading toward the administrative offices and asked, gently, if I was lost. I lied immediately. I said I was waiting for my parents. She asked how long I had been waiting. I said I did not know. She asked if I had eaten anything. That question was the one that broke me open. All the shame I had been swallowing since noon came apart in one ugly, uncontrollable rush. I told her they had left. I told her I had seen the car. I told her about the window and the laughing and the $50 bet. I told her everything in the disordered, breathless way of a child who has been holding something too heavy for too long. Maria did not tell me to calm down. She did not accuse me of being dramatic. She did not do any of the things I was braced for. She crouched slightly so that her face was level with mine, and she said, very clearly, "You are safe right now. And I'm going to help you." Security came first. Then transit police. One officer took my statement while another reviewed the station's security footage covering the main entrance. The cameras confirmed what I already knew. A child standing alone at a pillar for hours. A car slowing at the curb outside. A child running toward the glass. The car driving away. When the officers finally reached my parents by phone, I could hear only one side of the conversation. But I did not need both sides. I only needed to watch the officer's face go from cautious professionalism to open disbelief in the span of about 10 seconds. He asked if they were returning to Chicago immediately. He went quiet and listened. Then he said, "No, Leaving a 12-year-old child in a major transit station is not a lesson in independence. It is child abandonment." My whole body went cold when I heard those words. Not because they seemed too harsh. Because they fit perfectly over every single thing that had ever happened to me in that house. By early evening, I was sitting in a small office with a social worker while a report was being filed. She explained that because my parents were refusing to return immediately, and were still insisting this had been a parenting decision, I could not simply be sent home. There would be an emergency placement while the family court reviewed the case. She told me this in careful language. But her expression told me everything the language was leaving out. She believed me. More than that, she believed I had not been safe long before this particular day. I was terrified when they said I would spend the night with a foster family. I had grown up on a particular set of stories about what happened to children who got taken away. Stories designed, I understand now, to make me afraid of the one system that could have protected me. And then I walked into Mark and Laura Bennett's house. It was warm and cluttered in the way that felt lived in rather than chaotic. There were framed family photos on the walls. A lamp left on in the entryway. A dog bed in the corner, though the dog itself was asleep somewhere in the back of the house. It smelled like laundry detergent and something cooking. Laura asked if I wanted spaghetti or soup. Mark asked if I preferred the hall light on or off when I went to sleep. Nobody raised their voice when I said I did not know. Nobody laughed when I started crying at the dinner table after 2 bites of food because I was suddenly too exhausted to pretend I was fine. Laura just slid the tissue box quietly across the table, and Mark refilled my water glass without comment, and neither of them made me feel like my grief was an inconvenience or a performance or a weakness to be corrected. That first night in their guest room, I barely slept. Every car door outside made me flinch. Every creak in the hallway made me sit up rigid. But even through all of that, one thought kept circling in the quietest part of my mind. A stranger at a train station showed me more kindness in 5 minutes than my own mother had in years. And once you see that, once you understand that other people are actually capable of protecting you, it becomes impossible to keep calling cruelty normal. My parents arrived at family court in a lawyer and a navy blazer and pearl earrings. They looked calm, slightly offended, and almost amused, as though the real problem was that everyone around them was overreacting. They did not deny leaving me at Union Station. That was the part one still find almost impossible to understand. They admitted it openly. They just insisted it had been controlled. Educational. Necessary. My mother said they had been building resilience. My father said American children had gotten too soft and someone needed to show them how the real world worked. I sat across from them in that room and understood something that changed me almost as much as the station itself had. They were never going to become the kind of people who understood what they had done. If they had been capable of that kind of honesty, they would have turned the car around before they ever hit the freeway. The court-appointed therapist's report described a pattern of emotional abuse, humiliation, neglect, and escalating endangerment. Those words were not mine. But hearing them out loud felt like oxygen entering a room that had been sealed shut for 12 years. For so long, I had believed that my childhood was somehow my fault. That the things they did were things I had caused or deserved or could have prevented if I had only been better. It is a particular and devastating lie that abused children tell themselves, because it is easier to believe you are the problem than to accept that the people responsible for you have chosen harm deliberately and consistently. The report made it plain. This had not been a parenting style. This had not been misguided strictness. This had been abuse dressed in middle-class language. When the judge asked if I wanted to return home under court supervision, I said no. So quickly the word surprised even me. My mother stared at me as though I had struck her. My father muttered something about ingratitude. The judge did not flinch. The reunification process that followed was designed to give my parents a structured path back. Parenting classes, family therapy, supervised visits, regular court reviews. A 2-year program built on the premise that people can change when given the proper support. My parents rejected the entire framework. They hated being evaluated. They hated oversight. They hated the exposure most of all, the idea that teachers, therapists, and court officials now had access to the private face of the family they had spent so many years carefully presenting to the world. When it came down to a choice, commit to the program or voluntarily surrender their parental rights, they chose surrender. Just like that. My chest did not break the way you might imagine. It went strangely still. I had spent 12 years trying to be good enough, quiet enough, useful enough to keep them from turning on me. And in the end, they gave me up rather than admit they were wrong. They did not lose me because the system took me. They handed me over to protect their pride. The adoption took time on paper. Emotionally, it had already happened. Mark started saving art books and photography magazines for me when he noticed how often I drew. Laura knocked before entering my room, which sounds like such a small thing until you have grown up in a house where privacy did not exist. They learned which foods made me anxious because of old punishments tied to dinner. They stopped asking me to maintain eye contact when I was upset. They did not demand love, or gratitude, or instant trust. They just stayed. Steadiness can feel almost supernatural to a child who has never experienced it. When the judge signed the final adoption papers and I was asked if I wanted to change my name, I did not hesitate. Jennifer Caldwell belonged to a girl who had stood in a train station with $9 in her pocket, wondering if she would be alive or dead to her own parents by the end of the day. Sophia Bennett belonged to someone else. Someone with a room of her own and a desk with drawing supplies and a dog sleeping by the radiator and a family that did not calculate everything as a bet or a test or a lesson. I still remember the first night after the adoption was official. Laura put fresh sheets on my bed the way she did every Sunday. Mark left a new sketchbook on my desk without making a speech about it. Nobody told me how lucky I should feel. They just acted as though I had always been theirs. That quiet certainty, that uncelebrated, undramatic steadiness, healed more in me than any single dramatic moment ever could. Healing did not happen in a straight line, and it did not happen quickly. For years, my body still interpreted kindness as a possible trap. If Laura said she would be back in 15 minutes, I had to fight the urge to stand at the window until I saw her car turn into the driveway. If Mark was late picking me up from school because of traffic, I could feel panic building so fast it made my hands go numb and cold. I hated waiting in public places. I hated being told to stay put. I hated the phrase "I'll be right back" with a specific, visceral intensity one could not always explain. Therapy helped. Slowly. The kind of therapy that makes you say the ugly truths out loud, over and over, until the nervous system slowly begins to believe what the mind is trying to learn. I learned the words trauma and hypervigilance and emotional abuse. I learned that being hurt repeatedly does not make you stronger in the way that cruel people claim, it makes you adapt to danger. It makes you expert at survival and nearly incapable of rest. I learned to separate my parents' definitions of the world from the world itself. Art became more than escape during those years. It became structure, language, proof that I could build something beautiful without anyone's permission or participation. I threw myself into school, into portfolio work, into late studio sessions. I got into the Art Institute of Chicago. The city that had once swallowed me whole became the place where I built myself back. That felt like more than coincidence. After graduation, I took a job at a Denver branding firm. I moved far enough from Illinois that the geography itself felt like a form of safety. Eventually, I started freelancing. Then I opened my own studio. I built a reputation for clean, honest visual storytelling, helping people communicate clearly who they are and what they stand for. The irony of that was not lost on me. My entire career had grown out of the fact that I had spent my childhood trapped inside someone else's carefully constructed lies. I met Alex at a housewarming party. He was patient in the way that is almost indistinguishable from quiet strength. When I told him about Union Station, not on our first date, not on our second, but months later, when I trusted him enough to say the whole thing, he didn't interrupt. He didn't offer easy reassurance. He reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "That should never have happened to you." The simplicity of it nearly undid me. Still does, sometimes. We built our life slowly and deliberately. We got married in a small ceremony with Mark walking me down the aisle and Laura fixing the back of my dress while quietly crying. We adopted Max, a mutt with one torn ear and the cautious soul of something that had also been abandoned before it learned to trust. I blocked every account my biological parents ever used to try to reach me. I changed my number once. I did not visit Willow Creek. I did not use my old name. Most days I could go entire weeks without thinking about Jennifer Caldwell at all. That was the life those 29 missed calls interrupted. The voicemail was not from my mother. It was from my younger sister, Hannah. I had not heard her voice since she was a small girl following me through the hallway in mismatched socks, too young to understand why the air in our house always felt like the moment before a storm. Her voice now was older, rougher, the way voices sound when life has pressed on them. She told me our mother had late-stage cancer. Our father had suffered a mild stroke 6 months earlier. The stores were not struggling. They were gone, closed or sold at losses after the family's story resurfaced in the worst possible way. It had started with a single comment. My mother, in a stunning act of hypocrisy, had left a comment on a local Facebook post about parenting, suggesting that children today needed firmer discipline and that modern parents were raising a generation incapable of independence. One comment. One door. Old neighbors started sharing memories. A retired court clerk hinted publicly that the rumors were true. A newspaper brief from the old custody case surfaced. A former employee from one of the stores talked about what the Caldwells were like behind closed doors. The image they had spent decades polishing collapsed fast and ugly and in public. Customers stopped coming. Church friends went quiet. Civic groups stopped returning calls. Willow Creek, the same community that had protected their reputation for years, turned on them with the exact same tools they had always used. Gossip, social exclusion, and collective silence aimed in a different direction. They were now living in a subsidized apartment outside town. No house. No stores. No standing. No family story left to hide inside. Hannah said they wanted me to come back. Not because they had changed. Not because time had granted them the honesty they had always refused. Because they were out of options. Because they were frightened of dying alone. And because I was the daughter they had given away, which meant, in their logic, that I owed them something they had never managed to earn. I asked Hannah why she was calling if she knew all of that. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Because I wanted you to hear it from someone who isn't lying to you." She told me she had also cut contact, not years ago, but recently, after becoming a mother herself. After requesting copies of the court paperwork and finally reading what had actually happened the year I disappeared from the family. Our parents had told her a version in which I had overreacted, the state had overreached, and foster parents had manipulated a troubled child. Hannah said she had believed it for years, until she held her own infant son, looked at his face, and felt something shift so fundamentally inside her that she went looking for the truth. Reading those records, she said, felt like being hit by something she could not name. I looked at my son after, she told me, and I knew I could never let people like that near him. Hearing it should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like grief, deep and old and tired, the way grief does when it has been waiting a very long time to be allowed into the room. She asked if I would come. I said I would think about it. Alex told me I owed them nothing. Laura told me that whatever I chose, it had to be for my peace and not for their comfort. Mark said very quietly that some people only look for the bridge after they have already burned the house down. I sat with all of that through the night. By morning I knew one thing with complete clarity. I was not going back to save them. I was going back to end it. In my own voice. On my own terms. So that the rest of my life could exist without this one unfinished thing pulling at its edges. I flew into Chicago 2 days later and drove the rest of the way. The hospital room smelled like disinfectant and stale fear. My father looked older than I had imagined, smaller too, as though illness and disgrace had finally removed the performance and left only the ordinary man who had always been underneath it. My mother still had that instinctively arranged expression, even half sick. As though dignity were something she could still apply like cosmetics if she just held her face still enough. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother started crying before I had even settled into a chair. Not quietly. The kind of crying built to fill a room and pull focus away from accountability. She said my name, my old name. The one that belonged to the girl she had left at Union Station. I corrected her once. Sophia. She nodded, pressing a tissue to her face. My father said they had made mistakes. Mistakes. That careful, cowardly, load-bearing word. The one people use when the truth is too heavy and too ugly to carry in plain language. I told them no. A mistake is missing a highway exit. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. What they did was deliberate. They drove to Chicago. They walked me into that station. They pointed to a pillar and told me to wait. They pulled the car around slowly enough to make sure I would see them. My mother rolled down the window. My father gave a thumbs up. They drove away laughing. Every single step of that day was a choice. My father moved to speak, probably to reframe it, to soften it, to offer one more explanation in gentler packaging. I did not let him. I told them they had turned my fear into entertainment. That the reason they were sitting in that room without a business, without community standing, and without either daughter willing to stay by their side was because games end. Children grow up. Truth moves at its own pace, but it always arrives. My mother asked if I could forgive them. I told her forgiveness was not a debt I owed to people who only came looking for me when their own lives fell apart. And then I said the line I had been carrying in some form since I was 12 years old, sitting alone in the center of that enormous station, watching strangers hurry past, waiting for parents who had already decided to drive away. You bet $50 I couldn't find my way home. I did. I just didn't come back to yours. They both wept then. And for the first time in my life, their tears did not move me. Not because I had hardened myself against them, but because I had, at some point across 20 years, stopped needing their grief to validate what had been done to me. I told them I would not be paying bills, managing care, or restoring contact. I told them Hannah had every right to protect her child. I told them my family was in Colorado and in Illinois with the people who had actually earned that word. My father asked if this was really goodbye. I looked at him and said it had been goodbye for 20 years. You're just the last ones to understand that. I walked out after 20 minutes. I did not look back.